With the most recent chapter, Yuta has begun to leave his mark in the Shinjuku Showdown, and with his current performance against Sukuna. With this, the community have begun to argue who is truly stronger between Curse Technique Kashimo and Yuta Okotsu, and in this video we will find out that answer. First things first, let's scale the version of Kashimo that will be in the clash, and the first time we see the use of Curse Technique Kashimo is against the weakened Sukuna post Gojo Satoru. Now I'm going to make assumptions a little later to how each version of Sukuna stacks up to one we've seen in the series to kind of put into context my thoughts on how these characters scale. Kashimo against the weakened Sukuna was a one-sided battle, and immediately after using his curse technique he blitzes Sukuna. He then sends a sound wave straight at Sukuna, he then punches him again and sends his lightning discharge at Sukuna, which causes him to revive his higher Nero body. Now from this form, Kashimo gets ridiculous physical buffs in this form, with his agility passing the human realm and him being able to manifest any phenomena with electricity. Of course, with not being able to see all of these, it's really just headcanon the versions that you can see, but it is pretty useful with the fact that electricity can be used in multiple ways. We can infer his reflexes are off the chart, and in theory the electrical signals being sent to the brain should work to Godspeed like kilowatt. Regardless, the physical amp Kashimo receives is insane, and bar Sukuna and Gojo, he should have the best physicals in the series based on the principles of his technique. If base Kashimo is relative to Jackpot Hikari, who is able to dodge lightning's attacks, it would severely upscale Curse Technique Kashimo, who should be amped a lot more. Now when Sukuna reincarnated, it's a one-sided fight where Sukuna just bodies Kashimo. Tells Kashimo to dodge, and Kashimo is able to react to the World Slash in time, but still lost his hand. It's also important to note that he can actually see the attacks because he has the X-ray visions, which other characters just don't have that luxury. It also indicates just how quick the attack is, still being able to chop off his arm. He also has some means of healing, as after the arm was cut he managed to heal it back, which most likely coincides with his curse technique. Now this is as much as we can use to scale Kashimo, as his fight is extremely short. However, your view on the Sukunas they fought will give us an example to how we scale these characters. Durability, we can't really say much, like yes he's able to take numerous punches from Sukuna, but I can't really translate this to durability, as the only one continuously taking punches from Sukuna was Gojo. But if we scale this version of Sukuna higher than 15 finger Sukuna, then we can use the clash of Yuji and Maki versus Sukuna as an indicator, granted that Sukuna was nerfed. If Sukuna's regular punches are nerfed as well as his just regular curse technique output is nerfed, then this shows that this version of Sukuna is far more imposing. However, if we go with the other idea, and I know Lightning went into the translation and he said that his curse technique output was the only thing affected, then his regular punches should take to a similar effect, which puts them onto like relativity and sent punches that sent Yuji flying, but in the most part they came back up and were still able to contend with Sukuna. AP, he has sound waves, electromagnetic waves, and his lightning discharge, which is very overwhelming. Thanks to lightning, we have an idea how strong they can be, with lightning's notes suggesting with sound waves being strong enough to kill the user, and by definition are Mark 1. The EM waves are even more deadlier, but being a capable sorcerer like Sukuna, you can predict the attack from the curse energy buildup. Speed, Kashimo does not move at light speed, but he has a very good argument to be the third fastest behind Gojo and Sukuna, just based on his reflexes being moved past the human realm. His combat speed has been shown to be crazy from his limited fight that he has. Now we quickly scale Yuta, then make the comparison between the two Sukunas, and give scenarios on how this fight could occur. Yuta, since the time skip, has been on a run, and it starts off with his first sneak attack against Kenjaku. With successfully cutting off Kenjaku's head and managing to deal with all the curse spirits, it reinforces why he was the insurance for the main cast. Now those curse spirits are not anti by Kenjaku's curse energy, and he was able to outpace Kenjaku before he could react to anti-gravity, but this was big thanks to Takaba, who set the stage for this successful mission. After this we lead to the main event, which is the fight against Sukuna, and from first appearance we already see Yuta already have better feats against Sukuna than Kashimo, but bear in mind I'm saying this without context, so just bear with me. His first entrance is clashing with Sukuna, whether that is a reinforced hand with curse energy or Yuta clashing with a dismantle changes how impressive this feat is, as if it's the latter it shows a good way to counter the attack. However, I'm more inclined to believe it was a small cutting attack like a chainsaw, as that's the same attack he used to catch Yuta's katana. Rika then spawns her attack and Yuta uses Rika as a cloak to hide his attacks, which is pretty smart. And they continue to fight 2v1, and Yuta evades a dismantle and then pulls out his domain expansion, and this is where the bulk of his feats come from. Being able to do damage to Sukuna through sky manipulation and to keep him in place due to Hollow Wicker Basket. Now I ain't trying to recap a chapter we just had, but the very notable things from this chapter, so 1. Saving Yuji from the dismantle, meaning the dismantle cleave can be stopped just before the attack. 2. using sky manipulation to maneuver around and continue combat with Sukuna. And then 3, his combat speed being relative to Yuji. I don't know how valid it is, but at least being fast enough in their approaches to Sukuna. And then 4, being able to use cleave, and it seems that his overall AP and everything has just got significantly stronger, and his ability to wield Rika as a partial manifestation before he's even used his full form is a testament to how much stronger he has become. But how does this relate to his base stats? Speed. Like I said, his combat speed is there with Yuji. Of course, there's no comment on them going all out. However, I would assume from their monologue about Gojo and the fact that this gave them the best opportunity, they're going 100%, which shows their relative combat speed. He also has good reactions, being able to dodge a dismantle, and with Charles' ability he now has access to precog, which just means his reactions are pretty broken. Durability. Aside from feats, we got a statement from Sukuna propping up the increase in durability and saying they're weaker than Ryu, who needed a cleave to die. This is enforced with the dismantle he sent were able to be tanked by both Yuji and Yuta. Granted, his output has dropped, however he still gave them praise, which just suggests how much their durability has increased. Now, depending on your understanding, Yuta's durability may not have changed so much since time skip, and in Sendai, Ryu commented on his curse NG being like water tank. Now you say this is an endurance feat, but it doesn't really change much for me, as he'll be able to outlast longer, which just adds more feats for Yuta. His AP is pretty crazy now, especially if he has cleave and dismantle outside the domain, Drew Shikigami, curse speech, and let me take some time to those familiar with my videos. I gotta apologize to curse speech, which has been something I have been downplaying. It has been shown to be even more effective than I initially thought, but sky manipulation that bypasses guard is an overwhelming bag that can be super effective against Kashimo. Now we have scaled both, let's address the most important aspect in how you view these versions of Sukuna. We have Sukuna versus Maki and Yuji, whose curse technique output has been lowered, and depending on your translation, one has said his movement has been lowered and the other said it's just his curse technique output. We then have his current Sukuna that has less than half of his cursed energy, lowered, and output, and low RCT and no domain. And then the Sukuna Kashimo face, which has all the above, plus he's physically weakened from Gojo's remote purple. This is where it gets interesting, because the Sukuna Kashimo face should have the exact same issues aside from curse energy used from attacks and the one soul punch Yuji did. Now we have no scale for the Yuji soul punches, but the simple fact he said chip away at his output means it might not be a significant drop, meaning those versions of Sukuna are relative. This also means the version Kashimo face should be comparable in output and curse energy levels, giving us another scale on how close they are in strength. However, since reincarnation and we know his RCT only fixes physical stats, that means his curse energy output and levels are the same, and there was a drastic increase from a physical aspect. And this could be attributed to how Sukuna took the fight more seriously and fall in line with his dialogue he had with Kashimo. Now, if that Sukuna, Maki and Yuji face has only his movement speed reduced, then that means, in my opinion, that Sukuna is most likely stronger than the current one, as he can fight both Maki and Yuji simultaneously. But to clarify, we expect Yuji to be far stronger like Sukuna assumed, so you can argue that it kinda cancels out. But why am I bringing up these comparisons between the Sukuna is because the community uses Sukuna stomping Kashimo as evidence to him being a farmer, which is just kinda weird to me. The narrative of them being the strongest was shown in the clash, and Sukuna acknowledged him by including him in his monologue about strength by saying we. As well as put any other characters not including Gojo, the clash in my opinion goes the exact same way, which aren't anti-feats. But more importantly, how does this relate to Yuta? Because if he's facing a weaker Sukuna, quotation marks, if we use this logic, does that invalidate his feats? Hell no! Which is the opposite of what he's also been saying. The context before the fight is that if Gojo loses, the only chance to defeat Sukuna is that window straight after he beat Gojo, which means nothing has changed from a situation point, so we can't invalidate their feats for that reason. More importantly, the matchup is way more important because from a narrative perspective, you can say Kashimo is stronger based on the conversations about what it means to be the strongest and all of that, but that doesn't mean he'll win the match. This is why when people use the argument, how would Yuta do against that Sukuna, it takes away the most important factor of matchups, as Kamutoke is more effective against Yuta, and Yuta has a domain expansion. So with that said, in the way I'm going to focus more on the matchup and rank out of 10 how many times each person wins. To me, as I stated, I think Kashimo definitely had the stronger physicals, because even if you get that Sukuna to transform, the manner of doing so would be his overwhelming curse techniques. Moreover, Kashimo is on a time limit, so there's no chance of him taking it easy, as his body can break. Now if you agree that the students got significantly stronger post time skip, then this point isn't too important. But if you think their reinforcement are similar, then to put into context, Kashimo is relative to holding back Jack for Hikari before he increases his speed, and this curse technique Kashimo should be multiple times stronger than that, which just puts into perspective how much of a physical monster Kashimo is. However, will that be enough to stop Yuta's hacks? I definitely agree Sukuna hasn't taken it as serious as he did against Kashimo, but that's also due to how Yuta's abilities are. Rika and Yuta against Sukuna means the situation he's currently in is due to them. However, one aspect taken away is Sukuna evaluating the users before he kills them. In Kashimo's case, Sukuna was very lowered and it isn't a main character, so his showcase will always be shorter, as well as the fact that he forced him to transform very instantly. At the end of the day, he was there for a teaching lesson and is not as the same pleasure that he's looking for in somebody such as a Yuta, Gojo, and etc. or a Higuruma, which means that his context towards the fight is just a lot different. But Yuta was able to contend with that Sukuna till he used domain expansion, which even if Sukuna is holding back, we can't use these against Yuta's feats, and this Sukuna is faster than that Kashimo but hasn't used a similar sense of speed as he did in that clash. But to switch back to the matchup, once Yuta uses domain expansion, I don't see how Kashimo wins. One, he has Halo Wicker Basket, but you have to use hand size and that only allows his sound and EM waves as attacks. Not only that, but the overwhelming sure hit that currently Sukuna is keeping at bay because he's Sukuna, I don't believe Kashimo would have the same luxury, and would either get overpowered by the constant attacks or his Hollow Whisker Basket will eventually fade away. Angel's technique from what we've seen remove the cursed object, and him being an incarnated sorcerer would be effective. And speaking of Jacob's Ladder, this doesn't really look good for Kashimo, which is why the fight I'm really mainly scaling is the version versus Kashimo in the Edo period versus the current Yuta. The reason I'm saying this is because Jacob's Ladder should one-shot him, like realistically. And if you want to say that Yuta can't get off at Jacob's Ladder in time before Kashimo kills him, I think that's pretty disingenuous in my personal opinion. But the simple fact that it removes the cursed object, it should separate the user from the actual hosts, which would just be pretty crazy. And I think for the most part, especially with the next coming chapter, we'll probably get some more exposition, maybe a Jacob's Ladder's used or something, or maybe something that happens that give us some more insight. But from what I know, especially with that chapter, we saw Angel begin to chant. Just from the light alone, Sukuna couldn't react or do anything. And then straight after, she used the Jacob's Ladder and his body is burning, and I mean it is bad. So unless you think that Yuta can't ever do that, that version of Yuta would just beat Kashimo every single time, because whether it's a domain or outside the domain, he really should have no answer for Jacob's Ladder. But aside from Jacob's Ladder, it kind of puts into a nice, interesting conversation, because like I said, it's mostly physicals versus the hacks. I think Yuta's entire bag is ridiculous, and the fact that not only is it going to be a 2v1, it just adds him way more utility. Things such as Future Sight, which could really counter his speed, which is Kashimo's one of his biggest assets, which is just pretty crazy. Then he has obviously the Cleave and Dismantle. He has the Jushikigami that works like a domain. He has Curse Speech, which as I said has been a lot more effective. So telling him to stop moving while he can use like a Cleave and Dismantle, because we've seen him be able to spam techniques back to back to back. I think his overall utility is just too much for me. That even though I think Kashimo is so underrated because now the community have begun to downplay him severely, I just don't think he can match up against Yuta, whose overall bag is not only crazy, but he has a lot of curse techniques that really counter his biggest strength. Whether that's one, him as a vessel, two, the fact that he has Future Sight to be able to take the fact that he is much faster, and of course if he does do a Hikari where he can outpace his Future Sight to be able to prevent him from actually attacking him, then I guess that is an avenue. But in this instance, I don't agree that it would happen like that, and for the most part I think Yuta just will overwhelmingly win. Like realistically, I don't really see that much. And I know, like I said, I've given the scaling more to Kashimo in terms of the physicals. But like I said in JJK, physicals haven't been the be-in and end-all in a clash, for the simple fact we've seen people such as Kamo be able to react and keep fighting against Naoya. Example like Dido and Miyu as well, and even Dagon, he counteracted with his domain expansion. But we've seen in the series that just being overwhelmingly faster aside from Gojo and Sukuna hasn't been the one criteria for you to win, and specifically someone such as Maki, who was able to use precog to catch up and react to someone who's far faster, is an example of that. And especially as now Yuta has a similar ability, it would really boost him, and in my personal opinion he would just have too much for Kashimo. Overall, I think it really depends on your opinion on who you think wins. If this is the version that's a reincarnated sorcerer, then Yuta just wins every single time because of Jacob's Ladder and based on the principles of how it works, unless it's changed in the future. And then specifically if this is none, I still think his overall bag is a little too much, even though I think Kashimo could subjectively be quotation marks stronger, just because he may have a better matchup against other users. But in terms of Yuta, I personally don't see it, because I think his overwhelming cast techniques that he has is just too much. Now, a lot of people are going to think, what has this changed between this current Yuta and the previous Yuta? And yes, it's because he's a copy user, so his copy abilities are definitely going to play a significant matter. And the fact that, like I said, he has way too many counters for Kashimo, there's just way too much that Yuta's going to be do. And this is the fact that we haven't even seen him use his full manifestation yet, and he's able to use these amount of feats and scaling, really, which is just going to continue to get even higher. I think one thing that's interesting is, like I said, it really does depend on your version of how weak each version of Sukuna. With the fact that Yu's going to continue to do more soul punches, they're going to be able to put them in a bad situation. The Sukuna we're going to keep facing is going to be far weaker than the one that Kashimo faced. But at the end of the day, I can't really take these away from these characters, because this was the context, like I said, that we were going into through this Gojo versus Sukuna clash. And for the simple fact that they're facing a weaker Sukuna does not take away from the matchup, and is why I've been focused more on that in terms of scaling. So in my personal opinion, this version of Yuta probably beats Kashimo 7 out of 10 times. If it's the one that's the incarnated, he probably wins 10 out of 10. And even still, this is someone who rates Kashimo that I'm even giving him as many wins as this, because even if you want to say that Kashimo wins more than Yuta, I don't think it's a bad take personally. I just think that his abilities match up a lot nicer against Kashimo, specifically the fact that he just has way too much in his bag.